live streamed and recorded, and viewing information can be found on the district website. The meeting is now called to order. It is Wednesday, September 20th, 2023, and the time is 6:30 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Mr. Dorholt, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then when you're ready, can you please call roll?
Okay, and the following board members are present at the District Administration Office. Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
He's here.
Zach Dorholt is here, Shannon Haas,
Here.
Monica Shigera-Schwartz,
Here.
Heather Weems,
Here.
and the following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office. Dr. Lori Putnam, Dr. Jason Harris, Nikki Hansen, Dr. Mike Rivard, Adam Holm. I'm forgetting their titles. Should I keep reading their titles? All right. Amy Scallerud, Tracy Flynn-Bow, Gary Ganji, Donna Roper, Tammy DeLand, Paul Novak, and Gordy Scott, and Evan Voss.
Thank you. Okay. I don't have my instructions on how to work my microphone tonight. You thought I'd be okay. Okay, next I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's Board of Education meeting agenda.
I move to approve.
Okay, I'm going to go. I have a motion by Monica. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Okay, and a second by Scott. Al?
Madam Chair, I would like to ask that we move agenda item A down one and agenda item B up. It's kind of a clerical thing, but the strategic plan is based upon a mission statement, and if we haven't approved the mission statement, we shouldn't be approving the strategic plan.
Okay. So are we okay to approve the board agenda for tonight?
So I would move that we amend.
You accept the amendment? Yep.
Yeah.
And we're good? Okay, so are we
I
good
would
with
move that
that?
we amend that motion
Okay,
to include switching A and B.
okay. And so Monica is saying that she is amending her motion to approve the agenda with flipping A and B order. And Scott's giving a nod. Yes, he is good
Yes.
with that. We're just going to keep rolling with this
Yep.
process. And Mr. Dorholt, can you call roll? We're approving the agenda with flipping A and B.
Yes, Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Monica Shigera-Schwartz,
Yes.
Heather Weems, Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt is yes.
Thanks for rolling with that. Going on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of minutes from August 2nd, 2023 and August 16th, 2023. Item B, approval of bills and other financial transactions in the grand total amount of $9,314,508.60. Item C, approval of personnel staff changes, and item D, acceptance of grant awards and donations. At this time, does any member want to remove an item from the consent agenda? Then I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
So move.
Second.
I have a motion by Scott, a second by Natalie. Zach, can you call vote?
It's, Heather Weems,
Yes.
Monica Shigera-Schwartz,
Yes.
Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, yes. Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Scott Andresen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then we're moving on to now the item A is the approval of the District 742 mission statement for 2023-2025, presented by Superintendent Lori Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Haas, members of the board. Good evening. As is required in board policy, the board needs to reaffirm or change the mission statement every 2 years. We did have a discussion last time we met in September, and the board was supportive at that time of continuing the mission statement as is. So at this point, administration is looking for approval of the mission statement for the 23 through 25 school years. As it currently reads, as Chair Haas read us all just a few moments ago.
I move to approve.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Monica and a second by Scott. Any discussion at all? Okay, Zach, can you please call vote?
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold is yes. Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Monica Shigeru Schwartz.
Yes.
Heather Weems,
Yes.
Scott Andreessen.
Yes.
Thank you. Then moving to item B, which is approval of the 2023-2026 strategic plan presented by Dr. Lori Putnam, Superintendent, and Donna Roper, Executive Director of Research, Enrollment, and Assessments.
Good evening, Superintendent Putnam, Chair Haas, board members, colleagues, and listening community. It's my pleasure to be back again tonight to talk through our 2023 through 2026 strategic plan. I just want to say this is a lot of work done by lots of people in our district. And so I get to be the lucky one here tonight to share with you all of the really great things that really a lot of other people are doing. So I just want to make sure folks know that there's a lot of people behind all of this really great work. I think we're going to start with the mission and just roll through this. And I think, again, this is, you just approved the mission for the 23-26 plan. It's similar to what we had before. And so I'm going to kind of roll through these a little more quickly and get to the good stuff. You want to go to the next slide? Okay. Again, and you've heard this from our superintendent, our foundation for our strategic plan is really based on the components of the world's best workforce, legislation that implores us to ensure we are system ready for those kindergartners coming in, implores us to make sure we are closing learning gaps for all kids and that students are proficiently reading on the MCA in 3rd grade, as well as kids are attaining career and college readiness goals, and then of course graduating. So our strategic plan's foundation is based on those 5 pillars. Next slide. And in addition to that, after the conversation that we had last time, we wanted to just go back and kind of think about some of the conversation and bring to you what we also have been doing as components of our foundation and our strategic plan. And they do include things like our some of the essential or social emotional learning skills that we talked about last time, along with, prioritizing foundational literacy and numeracy skills, the Minnesota content standards, and of course, those really important employability, career and college readiness skills that we want kids to have when they leave. And in ISD 742 for, I would say, the past several years, we have been working towards embedding many of these skills into the courses that our teachers are teaching, including things like effective communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and the new one that was added most recently was curiosity. So I didn't want members of the board to think that we hadn't considered some of these additional components. We we thought about it after the conversation last time and wanted to just bring it back as, and yes, this is part of our comprehensive strategic work. Knowing that, going forward, we may find we have to add things and/or look at this a little more closely. So moving into our actual strategic plan, what I'm going to do next is just share with you, obviously the objectives and the strategic initiatives we're very familiar with. They are the same ones that we had last year. They're going to be highlighted because they are initiatives that we're working on, and we've been doing work around for the last at least 2 years since I've been here that I'm aware of, and I'm sure even before that. So you'll see the first slide just shows you what we continue to work on, and then we'll go to the next slide. And what I thought might be helpful is to just highlight for you some of the activities aligned to these strategic initiatives so that you have an understanding of how we're coming up with the ways in which we want to monitor the outputs and the outcomes for each of these strategic initiatives. And so in the last couple of years, as we've heavily focused on making sure we are providing positive climate and culture for both our staff and our students, you can see that we're monitoring it, and we are continuing to do things. So we will continue to do conscious discipline, for example, at the elementary. We'll continue to work on restorative practices. We will be looking at ways to measure. How can we understand and use social emotional behavior assessments to support increasing those essential skills that kids need to be successful. And so that's a lot of what we will be doing this year in this focus area. We also know that, keeping safe spaces and inclusive places for our learners and their families is really important. And so those are pieces also that are reflected in many of our schools' continuous improvement plans with designated outputs and outcomes that they are looking to see that those things are happening. And again, expanding voice is another way that many people in our system are looking to grow kids' sense of belonging, if you will, and their sense of feeling safe in the climate. And so one of the new things that we're doing in this area, I would say, is really looking at kids in their context and trying to look at their assets and not just use our sort of multi-tiered systems of support to be calling out what they don't know, but rather how are we incorporating their interests, their passions, things like their accomplishments. And so we'll be working with our teams this year in the continuous improvement process to look at gathering some of those pieces to inform how we meet learner needs. Okay, so this next area, focus area 2, you heard us talk about how this will be a very heavy focus for us in the upcoming school year. And so again, all of the strategic initiatives are highlighted here. When we went back and talked through these initiatives and we wondered, okay, so what does this really mean? And if you go to the next slide, we brought in some research to sort of support our understanding of how do we really tackle some of this really important work in strategic area 2. And so we know from the research that when you attempt to improve learning at scale, and this is in many different studies, but I pulled out this particular one from the Center for Assessment because we're doing a lot of learning this year from work that the center produces. And so they say there are 3 ways that you can go about improving learning at scale, and that's kind of the key because we're targeting our Tier 1 classrooms, and we're really looking to see that our teachers are understanding ways in which we raise the level of the content that's taught, or are finding ways that we increase their skill and knowledge in the teaching of that content, and then finding ways to increase the level of students' active learning in the content. we think that much of what we're doing, and you're going to see this next in the next two slides, that if we ask ourselves, are we doing one of these three things in the activities that we are committing to, aligned to these strategic initiatives? And if we are, we feel good about that. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see in this area where we have identified strategic initiative around culturally relevant and engaging pedagogy, and we're listing activities that some of that work falls it falls into all of these areas, but we're bringing in research. We are raising the level of the content that is taught through our letters learning with teachers, through our iReady, and our learning around the math, effective strategies for teaching mathematics, as well as embedding in some of the social emotional learning skills into the learning lessons. These are ways that we raise the content, the level of the content that is taught. And so we feel good about committing to these activities going into the upcoming year. At the secondary level, we also have a lot happening with literacy and math specialists, getting in and really working with our subject area secondary teachers on specifically literacy strategies, on specifically math strategies. We call them PLTs and teacher learning communities or collaboratives. The idea being that we are really wanting our teachers to talk together about their learners' evidence of learning. And so you'll see we are committing to making this an important priority in the coming year. And then many of our teachers are looking at implementing what we call modern classroom techniques. And those include things like delivering content in a blended learning fashion, allowing for some more, some different pacing, and also focusing on mastery-based. And then a big one at our secondary is just tackling some of our classroom assessment practices and our grading practices. And we believe that all of these are aligned with the research when it comes to what it says about improving learning at scale. So we're hopeful that these are going to be really effective, and we'll know our impact next year at this time when we bring back our results. The next slide is, again, in area 2, and this is the second objective, which is really focused on our professional learning. And again, we saw that making that toolkit that our teachers have really wide and really deep is the focus of this area. So many of the activities here are focused on professional learning and really helping our teachers embrace kind of the science and the research in the classroom. And we'll be studying some of the local data in our continuous improvement process as well. So as we aim to improve outcomes, focusing on instruction, we hope that having our continuous improvement framework infrastructure in place and giving teachers new learning as they're collecting data is going to give us a way to kind of exercise those monitoring muscles and really see some impact. So again, this will be a big focus area for us. Area 3, which is innovation, is also not going to get away without doing anything this year. So you'll see we have 3.1b highlighted, and if you go to the next slide, some of the activities that we are aiming to accomplish this year, and all of our innovations we hope will be aligned and have a very academic focus. So last year we did some innovations around some of the climate and culture pieces, and this year we want to do more with student data summits focused on academic outcomes. We also want to, be hearing from staff ideas and ways that they know that are improving practice and making sure we're lifting up those really creative, innovative, successful ways that they're doing things. And then a big one will be partnering with students to help us do some design work around what we're calling Portrait of a Graduate, which was discussed last time as well. We know that there is a significant interest among many to begin identifying the key elements of that Portrait of a Graduate. So that'll be really exciting to watch in the coming year. And then finally, in the focus area 4, this is a huge area that doesn't stop just because we focus on area 2. They're all intertwined. And I'm going to just take you down to the next slide, which details, we have 2 pages of activities, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch. We have a lot happening in our high schools related to career and college readiness. And so this work will continue. A big focus will be on documenting the learner's four-year plan. We have a tool now called Zello. It's well suited to help us capture some of those things that we were talking about earlier around kids in context, like their accomplishments and their interests and their passions. And so Zello is a tool that we'll not only use to help kids do career exploration activities and self-reflect on interests that they have, but also create their four-year post-secondary plan. And again, you can see, I'm not going to read all of these. There is quite a few here, and likely I'm missing some. So I want to just put that out there. I know there's a lot happening in this area, and it will continue to happen in the coming year. And finally, I'll go down to family engagement. This is another area that we know we have to continue working these strategic initiatives. They matter. And so if you go down to the next slide, you'll see some of the activities that we will keep doing. I think we're going to continue with, obviously with our continuous improvement plans at schools and working on engaging families in a variety of ways, as well as continuing our superintendent will continue those coffee and conversations, I believe, partnerships with places like the Cop House, getting involved in as many community events as we can, making sure that people in the community know who we are, what we offer, why they should choose us, all of those really great things that our communication department does such a good job at. And then in our navigating of systems at the Welcome Center and schools, obviously we want to make sure we're putting things out in ways that families can access them, whether it's through translations or just finding ways to navigate the system. And then I think, a big goal is just increasing our cultural competence. As we know, we have a very large number of students that enter every year who have home languages other than ours that we speak here nightly. And so we'll continue to promote and support making sure that we're all just growing in our understanding of the kids and families that we serve. I also think I want to add that we are going to track preschool interests, because that was brought up here last time, and I think that's a really important place for us to be starting. We know that that's a really key area where we have opportunities to close learning gaps early and quickly, so that will be on there as well. And then finally, the last slide again, you saw this last time, and I think because we are in this building process, eventually what we will see is a way for us to kind of really be monitoring as we go from year to year what we call a KPI, key performance indicators, or a scorecard, with the idea being that, you won't always have all greens on your scorecard, and you don't want that, right? You're always going to be wanting to be showing that you're making progress, and as things get green, they might come off, and some things are going to stay on there forever because you're always going to be working to improve those. But the idea would be that all of this work that we're doing, all of the strategic initiatives that have, a lot of committed activity and resources to them, we would want to measure to see how we're doing and provide that to you as the governance people to help us make future decisions. So that is our strategic plan, and thank you for letting me deliver that, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for the work that you have been doing with this. I didn't have a lot of time to review the questions that I had asked last time. So I wanted to know how you addressed them, and I apologize if you have them there into the material that you sent us today earlier, but didn't have a chance to see it. Well, no, not that I'm expecting to see my questions, but to see how you address them.
Okay.
And do you want me to remind you my questions?
So are you asking about like the well-rounded?
Yes.
So again, I think the way I tried to bring that back was through the additional components of the strategic plan. So if you go to the third slide, maybe go up. If you look here, what you will see is that there are many people in the district who have already been working on the skills needed for a long life of learning, which include some of those essential skills, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, those kinds of things. And at our secondary sites, they've been working hard on some of those other employability skills, those career skills, communication, collaboration, creativity. I would say we're not done, and that there is conversation about Portrait of a Graduate, which gets us to those questions around what is the experience we want all kids who graduate from ISD 742 to have. And we did talk a little bit about that today in one of our committees, and so I think that may be what you're thinking of, Monica, or it could be, you wanted to see that we are doing some of these other things.
You're in track of what I'm asking. I'm looking very specifically about where do I check next year when we are doing this review for progress, or for alignment, or for what do I check next year to see that this has been addressed?
So I think we'll bring you the scorecard with some of those measures on there. And if there are things that you want specifically to see on there, we could talk through that and figure that out. But as far as measuring essential skills, if you will, what I can tell you is that this year we're going to be piloting some measures to help us understand social emotional learning skills. I don't know that we'll have solid data. We'll have some pilot data for that. And again, those are standardized measures that in the very beginning of time, when you start implementing those, you look at them as perception. It's the perception of the teacher's view of the student's self-regulation, for example, if you will. And then often you would have students take their own self-reflection, and you would compare and look at the gap. And the goal would be to set the data up so that you're looking to close the gap. What does the teacher perceive? What does the student perceive? And then how do we close that? When it comes to things like, are they growing in their SE, social emotional learning skills, for example?
The other question that I had is about, you said that, and I'll try to quote something about the way that we learn about the way that we address this part of the different cultures that we have is as we become more culturally competent. Could you give me some examples about how are we doing that? Or what does that mean to become more culturally competent for the district?
So, and I think this is a really tricky one, right? Because all of us are on a different journey with our understanding of different cultures based on our life experiences and our own learning. But I would say as a learning organization, we're always open to learning and growing around what we may not know and understand about families coming from all kinds of different cultures and settings. And so, you know, we offer professional learning. We have a 3-year PD plan that will allow for some of that deep learning. I don't know if that answers your question.
A little bit. Those are the examples that I'm looking for. What other things do we do?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah.
And I welcome our assistant superintendents as well. You know, I think this is something that we continue to work on, right? So I think the professional learning is absolutely one of those, right? We're partnering with our, you're part of it, right? You're partnering with our community to bring people in, right? People who actually are part of the communities that we serve, to teach our non-licensed and licensed staff from their perspectives about things that they believe we need to know about the students that we serve. We continue to talk with our students. So one example I can give you is we are developing, as you guys know, we are developing some optional courses for our staff that will allow them to display a signal to our students that they have some experience or expertise, really some beginning expertise, right, in supporting students in their areas where they need support belonging. And we are asking our students, what do you believe our staff need to support you in your feelings of inclusion? So I would say that that's a clear example of the ways that we listen to our community and our families, the way we listen to our students to develop that cultural competence, because we are working directly with the communities that we serve to do so. You are welcome.
Monica, I can give you one more example of that, and Scott, you can chime in because I know I saw you there. Last Friday, we also had a PD day. Staff got together at Apollo. One of the sessions that they got to sit through was our director of equity took them through a cultural lens and how it impacts our students. And so they talked through things like the cultural iceberg and how to approach situations and learn stories so that we can best relate and build those critical relationships with our students and start to understand one another. So that was another opportunity that we got to see that. The other piece I wanted to talk to as far as essential skills are we did get to meet as a K-12 instructional team last week. We started the work on our continuous improvement plan and really looked at strategic area 2, instruction that produces positive outcomes, and set specific targets for literacy, numeracy, and essential skills. So our team is working towards identifying those experiences and those essential skills needed to produce those well-rounded graduates.
Sorry, could you repeat literacy and what is the second one?
Numeracy,
Oh, numeracy.
yep. And then we talked a little bit about the portrait of a graduate heading and landed on essential skills. And our next steps with that plan are to start to identify measurements and indicators to know if we've hit our growth progress towards our goals. So we should be able to have some updates for you on that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First of all, what I say is not going to have any bearing on how I vote on this. I support the strategic plan, so you're not swaying me with your answer. But I do have a question on one of the slides, and it's the one, if you go back to the slide that says instrumental on it. Nope, it's forward from there. Oh, it's the one that said that everything else is instrumental?
Oh, yeah, the research.
That one.
Yeah.
I find this slide to be really strange. Because normally if I'm going to do something like this, I'm going to say there are 3 ways to improve learning at scale and everything else is secondary, right? But this one says there's 3 ways to improving learning at scale, which is really the things that we're focusing on in the strategic plan. But then it says, that's it. Everything else is instrumental, which means that's the most important. everything else is more important or the most important. This whole thing hinges on everything else. And that's all of our social emotional supports. And I truly do believe that. You can teach all you want, but if a kid isn't ready to learn, you're not going to be able to teach them anything. They're not going to learn I'm not going to say they're not going to learn anything, but they're going to have a very difficult time learning if they aren't ready to learn. So I agree with what they're saying, but it's a really odd slide to me. And it seems like everything else, if everything else is instrumental, that should be addressed in our strategic plan somewhere.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and I think the way I read it, which I'll just share with you, because I agree, maybe it looks a little kind of out of sorts there. What this is referring to is what happens in the classroom when kids are all together with their teacher. That is how we will improve learning at scale, is when we're not pulling them out for an intervention, we're not pulling them over here, we're not sending over there, we're keeping them as much as we can so that they're able to access as much of the, core instruction is kind of what that's getting at. But I see what you're saying, and I appreciate that comment. I think, yeah, it's a little, maybe a little harsh. Everything, that's it. Everything is, I agree with you. It wasn't my quote. I maybe shouldn't have put it there in hindsight.
Mike, can you go back to maybe the slide that was before the one we were just on? No. Go back one more. No, that's not it either. My question in general, and particularly as we focus on, so much of the social emotional readiness and support and those sorts of things, and kind of watching the trending of education over time, how do you balance supporting students with, I'll call it grade inflation, teaching them soft skills, and we talk about letting them learn more at their own pace, but then in the work world, there's also the balance of having deadlines and having to meet those sorts of things. So as you're working with students, what do you do to balance that? And we know we went through in the 80s and 90s, are we building self-esteem versus confidence, which are two very different things. One is just telling people that they're great, and we believed that built self-esteem, but then we found out that truly confidence is built through adversity. So how do you balance that in the classroom and in the strategic plan so that we're not falsely increasing things by just making it easier per se? Does that make sense?
I can start, but I might pass this to my friends to the left here. First, what I would say is that when we talk about pacing and learners having some choice and voice, what we're talking about is learner agency. And the reason why learner agency is so important is because we want kids to learn about how they learn, activate their metacognition, and have to think about, how do I want to learn this content? What works for me tackling this learning task? And because ultimately we do want kids to leave us with the skill of being able to gain new learning without us. Right? So, and this learner agency can start at a very young age. It's really quite amazing. And if, it's not like classrooms are just going to be out there willy-nilly, go at your own pace over here. It's very structured. When teachers are allowing self-pacing, it's a strategy. It's structured, and I could toss this to these guys over here because they know way more about it than I do. But so, does that help? Yeah. And Jason, I don't know if you have anything you would want to add to that. I know at the high school there are some innovators that maybe do a little bit of that in their classrooms teachers may be using?
Yeah, I think you hit the piece around the agency in the way of a classroom and how do you pace with the larger group. I think that's working with the teacher, the classroom environment, and how do you create those standards around what you want to see in that metacognition way. So if we're writing to learn, reading to learn, those are the things that we look at or the teacher looks at within the classroom. I think we had some things where kids weren't getting core instruction, right? And so we know if you're pulling kids out, they're missing instruction time and we need to keep them within the group, right? And the teacher, we have some skilled teachers that really see where kids are and identifying where they are so we can create individual plans for their kids and pathways.
Jason, before you turn your mic off, could you also talk a little bit about at secondary particularly how we've pulled behavior out of grades to kind of address that point of rigor? And even when we were heading towards like assessing creativity, where that would actually show up on a report card?
Yeah, I think one of the things, Donna hit it in the previous slides around assessments, right? And really making sure that the assessments that we are using is assessing, checking for learning and understanding, right? We understand each content should be aligned to state standards. And so how do we support around those assessments? And I think this year, secondary is really focused in on that skill set with the teachers to not look at attendance behavior, but their understanding around the content area, right? And so some of the things that I would say, I'm just trying to think of an example that in the classroom, work study skills, right? Well, let's just look at, as we prepare our students around the social emotional learning piece, what does it look like specifically around the work skills that we want to prepare our students for when they leave us? So if it's how to collaborate, if it's how to communicate, if it's how to problem solve, I think we are really diving in, standing on positive instruction and outcomes within the classroom to look at those assessments to check for understanding.
And I would just offer, this looks a little bit different in the land of the littles. We firmly believe that no significant learning happens without that significant relationship. So you're gonna see morning meeting established first thing in the morning, creating those collaborative communities where students can express their social emotional needs. And then when we get to instruction, you're gonna see things like what's next activities. Once you finish up that independent activity, what is the enrichment and extension that a student can move on to? And then what is the small group learning that's happening for reinforcement for students who need it.
One other comment or maybe question, dealing more around enrollment numbers, and I'll just say, and I think I've said this before, being on school board has been very eye-opening for me, and even more so, I know that my students come home to a certain level of support, and the things that District 742 do is very impressive. When we talk about marketing and some of that sort of thing, and this probably is to Tammy a little bit, but do we hit some of the low-hanging fruit? And by that I mean, and just from anecdotal information, having been a hiring manager in this community, do we work with realtors and go in and talk to them about what we're doing? Do we go to the human resources offices at some of our larger hiring agencies like Centricare, like St. Cloud State, like, Wolters Kluwer, whatever those are, and give them information? Because having moved into this community a decade ago, there were very strong feelings immediately when you come into this community about where you need to go and why, to be honest, other school districts are better and that we should locate someplace other than this district. And I've not found that to be true at all. How do we hit that head on, and particularly with those folks who are very influential for new people coming from the outside who just don't know?
So I can jump in on that one. Tammy is instrumental in this. and often I am the one that goes to do that. Right, so I met with SCAR, with our Realtors Association, and we brought them a top 10, right? The top 10 amazing things about St. Cloud Irish Schools, things you need to know. We gave those, they loved that. We also have a Realtors packet on our website for people who don't know. That does exist. I have been, and now Jason will be part of that employer advisory council, right? Which includes HR from Centricare, the Career Center from St. Cloud State, all like our major employers, Park Industry, the KDB Bergen. It's not that anymore, though. They just changed their name, right? So all of that, and then one of my goals in going to Rotary and to being on the chamber board and going to being a member of GSDC is to be out and representing us and who we are to the people that sometimes tend to influence that. And then, the other thing that we are going to do, because we can always do better, right, about telling our story, getting it out to more people, is that we are going to be allocating a portion of our, some of those funds that we had this year, that one-time money, to partnering with a data analysis marketing PR firm, right, to do some of that deep data work that Tammy's team just doesn't have the capacity to do because they're doing the day-to-day so beautifully, to really start to understand, why do you choose us? Why do you leave us? Why don't you ever choose us? And then figure out how to tell our story differently based on what the families are needing. Yeah, absolutely. Great question.
I want to go back to the part about cultural competence as well that Monica was talking about. And just to say, like, there was, cultural competence was the thing, right? And then it became, that's not a thing at all, and it's cultural humility. And now it's like more of a, from what I read in DEI work, it's like a marriage of the two. So the difference there being like cultural humility is not only about, because you can never be competent in another person's culture. But humility is more like, what is your culture, number one? Like, the dominant culture is a culture, and sometimes we don't even think about that. So it explores who you are, and then what your lens, which I hear you saying that you do already, what your lens means to looking at someone from another culture. So some, especially first it was in the medical field and then education, that they said cultural competence seems like a top-down approach. Like, let us learn about your culture instead of let's all learn about each other. And yes, if you aren't familiar with the culture that you have in your classroom, then that's great learning. But also, what do you have to learn about yourself first in order to even be ready to learn? Like I was talking about, to be ready to learn about another culture.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Could you tell me where in the strategic plan they have the science of reading that the legislature just required?
So if you look under activities, we have letters, which is the research-based literacy instruction that follows the science of reading. And so that is a really big initiative this year, rolling out, being very well received. We are learning it, we are doing it, we are assessing it all this year. So a lot happening with that.
I know there was a presentation on it. It was very impressive. Apparently got to the legislature too. The legislature also passed something on Native American culture. Where do we have that in the strategic plan?
So within our 3-year professional development learning, there, I know that Director Omar's department has, so the great thing about that collaboratively designed 3-year PD plan is that our internal expertise is being leveraged for learning, and our American Indian parent person and other staff in the equity department are offering some sessions throughout the year as options for staff to learn more about those pieces. Is that what you're asking? Is there?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be just the Native American culture, but other cultures too.
yeah.
How does extracurricular activities relate to the strategic plan? I mean, does the plan stop at let out time, 3:30 or whatever it is? Or does it continue on?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's where you see a lot of kids learning about good collaboration and effective communication. And so I do think we are committed to ensuring all kids are connected to activities and extracurriculars. At the secondary, I mean, I don't know if it's called out specifically in any of our strategic initiatives. I'll have to go back and look to see if there's something specifically about activities. If there is, I'm guessing it would be in our positive climate and culture. So, yeah, and I know it is, again, that's one of the things about everything probably isn't on here that we're doing, but activities is a very large area.
Yeah, I was thinking in particular like clubs such as robotics, or geography club, or whatever. There's a lot of activities we're involved in. How does that reflect on the strategic plan?
I think that's a really fair question. And I don't know that I called it out like I maybe should have in the plan, or that we called it out, maybe we should. Because, we've often talked in our continuous improvement process work with the building principals about making sure every kid is connected to some extra activity. And so I know it's always a conversation in circles that I'm working in with staff that are saying what are ways to make sure our kids are successful. So,
That's enough.
great.
We're going to go Heather and then Natalie.
Just an extension off of Scott's question, and out of ignorance probably as much as anything. I know that, at least in sports, I don't know, maybe the music and arts as well, there are a number of coaches who are not teachers primarily, and they come from the outside. As it relates to all of this information and being a connection point, how much do non-affiliated or affiliated but non-staff, that's not right, they're staff, but non-teacher staff, how much are they included in this, and how aware are they of these goals and how it relates in extracurricular activities?
Like, how do we tell them about it, or how are they? Can you clarify for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you do all of this great work in teaching about belonging and teaching teachers how to teach better and to connect, and your staff and everything. And the day-to-day folks who are there for multiple hours are certainly involved in that. When you have folks from the outside who are maybe not teachers or not involved in, are they involved in staff development of any sort, or is that an individualized plan? And could we make sure that there's some sort of connection there?
Jason looks like maybe he can answer that.
Yeah, because right now I currently work with the activities directors and activities coordinators. And one of the things from my initial meeting last week was, right now, your outside folks that are staff need to know more about this. But one of the things that we start to look at, and this year was the first year, that professional development for your coaches, right? And I think that's the way you hit in on this. What we found when I talked to the athletic directors and activities coordinators, they found the professional development. We had an outside consultant, but I think as we grow our coaches, we want to really help them understand, all our coaches, to understand our focus areas around our strategic plan.
Monica? And then Natalie? Sorry, but Natalie and then Monica.
Mine will be really quick. I really, for my kids anyway, their sense of belonging comes from their friends somewhat, but mostly from their activities, 100%. I mean, Milo's in band in ninth grade this year, and 1 hour before they were going to go around and do the homecoming thing, then a student leader in band who's a senior came to her in band and said, "Oh, by the way, you're playing the bass drum and walking around the school today." And because they knew that Milo could, and Milo was like, "Oh, okay." And, they came home so happy and red in the face and wondering why they wore a turtleneck today. And, just like so, like I was part of something, and so it's that focus area one, I think, that we could wrap in what Heather's talking about.
Just kind of following Natalie's previous comment about cultural competency. I different what she was bringing up to the table about new trends. I like to see a specific kind of action steps. Some of them very practical. I can just give some examples. I like to know what does it mean to be cultural competent for us, or maybe not. Like as Natalie said, we don't end up being cultural competent ever, but what does it mean to strive to that point, to cultural competency? I like to see some definitions. And as you said, Donna, there are some experiences that become part of our learning, and it seems like you have gone through this journey for a long time. What I like to see is that does everybody has that recognition that you had right there when I asked about cultural competence, and you told me right out of your first thought is like, well, we are based on our experiences that we have. I like to see if everybody across the board, if we ask the janitor, they will come up with, this is according to my experience, this is what we have in our culture. That's kind of what I like to see. If we have, and I mean, I was choosing a custodial position just because it is a position that you most likely won't see with children, or maybe not in the direct contact with children. So this a position that you must unlikely think that will have the same professional development that teachers have, for example, in that area. But that is what will speak to me about everybody knowing about, everybody striving towards cultural competency. So I wanted just to clarify why I chose the example. Some definitions, some knowledge that this is based on experience, and also what does it mean for us to be in a multicultural environment. That is something that comes out in my work, for example. I work in a multinational with people from all over the world. So what does that mean when we are doing something? And when we're doing something that might mean for me, or in my experience, as you have pointed out, my experience being in a multicultural environment is a continuous negotiation. You are negotiating all the time. And so how is that seen, and how does that play out, and how does the negotiation between power relations work? And by that I mean, how does negotiation means between the teacher and the student, the teacher and multiple students from different backgrounds, or I don't know, a coach in a group, or some person in a level of authority with another person that is seen in a not that same authority. That is just kind of and what is our culture as an organization, as a school? So we talk about, and I have actually learned in one of the trainings that you have in the school, we talk about this training that caught my attention at some point. We talk about code switching. What you do at home might not be the same thing that you do here. It might be accepted at home, might not be accepted here, and vice versa. But that goes with values, and how is that implemented in our schools? So those are very specific things that I like to see kind of more lively understood. I do think that those are like cutting edge things that we can talk about cultural competence without going into the multiplisms and the issues with power leveling that we have out there and that everybody's bringing up at some point, and that it becomes a lot of controversy. But I do like to see these very specific characteristics of cultural competence and how we look at all those. Then if we just having that basic level understood by everyone, then we can start looking at values and who is up and down if you want to, and but that will be done after coming to the line.
I did attend some professional development for the non-licensed staff last week, and they did touch on some of the cultural stuff, but you are right, they could have much more.
Any other questions or comments? Donna, I just want to say thank you for taking the front line to all of our questions. And you preparing for this and thinking, okay, that you know this, but what do I need to make sure that, what are they going to ask me about? There's no way that you would have thought of this.
I learned tonight. That's all I know. So thank you.
So thank you. So administration is recommending that the school board approves the 2023-2026 strategic plan. And so I'm looking for a motion to approve this plan.
So move.
Do I have a second? Okay, I have a motion by Scott and a second by Zach. Zach, can you call roll?
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Heather Weems,
Yes.
Monica Segura-Swartz,
Yes.
Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold is yes, Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Tracy is moving this right along and getting it queued up. Okay, next we have exciting approval of tentative agreements, presenting Tracy Flinbow, Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations.
Okay, good evening, Chair Hawes, Board Members, Superintendent Putnam. I'm happy to report that at 3:30 this afternoon, the Nutritional Services Group ratified their tentative agreement, and so I have that for you tonight to review for your approval. This group is about 101 employees, and you see it's 67.51 FTE, so about half of this group works about 5 hours a day, 4.75 hours a day as kitchen helpers. So it's a large group and a combination of both part-time and more full-time employees. The year one package for this group includes steps for all eligible employees, a 6.75% increase in hourly wages for all employees, a 2.5% compression adjustment for those employees in lanes A and B. So those are our head cook positions, and a 1.0 compression adjustment for lane C, which is second cooks. It increases longevity rates at some of the levels, and you see all of the longevity rates listed in the handout. We eliminated certification pay, which was a 15-cent per hour add-on to most of the employees, and instead just incorporated that into base wages. The district insurance contribution for single was increased, as we've done with our other groups, to $615 a month to match the teachers. We increased the wellness pay percentage from 60% to 80% of eligible hours at the end of each year. We added the Juneteenth holiday for staff working during the summer session. We revised their severance plan, as we have done in several other groups last round and this round, to move away from the accumulative leave, kind of store your sick leave model of severance, and instead use a years of service model that is better reflects people's years of service. We agreed to increase the 403B match for all employees at the 4-hour-a-day level and higher, again, because this group has over 50 of their employees work 4.75 hours a day. They wouldn't be eligible for the full match because most of our benefits are 6 hours a day or more. And so recognizing that many of these members aren't even eligible for health insurance benefits because of that level, we wanted them to be able to participate fully in that 403B plan. You can see the new starting rates with those increases for our kitchen helpers, our entry-level position at $16.01 an hour, our bakers and facilitators at $17.03, our second cooks starting at $19.05, our first cooks in the elementaries at $20.05, and our senior and junior high first cooks at $20.74 an hour. In year 2, the package includes steps for step-eligible employees, a 3% increase in hourly wages for all employees across the board, and then you see the new starting rates with kitchen helpers moving to $16.49, bakers and facilitators to $17.54, second cooks to $19.62 an hour, elementary cooks to $20.65 an hour, and the senior and junior high first cooks to $21.36. The total 2-year cost of this package is 11.50%, and I'm looking for a motion to approve the agreement with the Nutritional Services Group.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Heather and a second by Scott. Any discussion? Natalie?
Can you just go over why the elementary first cooks get a lower wage than the senior, junior high first cooks?
It's the size and scale of those schools and the complexity. They run multiple lines. The job is just more complex. The amount of ordering, the planning work gets bigger as you get into those bigger schools.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, Zach, can you call vote?
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, a yes. Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Heather Weems,
Yes.
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Next, we have the preliminary levy certification presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Putnam, members of the board. We are looking at the preliminary levy tonight. This is the first step in the levy process. The preliminary levy comes tonight, and then the final levy comes to the board in December. It's still thinking. Oh, now it kicked me out. There it goes. Okay. So there are 4 components of the levy. There's the three components: general fund, community education, and debt service. So the general fund is the largest portion of our levy, so we'll look at that first. What you see on the screen is the actual levy that we would have approved last year, the 2022 pay 23, compared to the 2023 pay 2024. Our levy is done a fair amount in advance just because of the timing of everything and the fact that a school operates on a fiscal year compared to taxes that are collected on a calendar year. So what we're looking at tonight will be collected from the taxpayers by the county in calendar year 2024 and then recognized as revenue by the district in fiscal year 25. So not this school year, but the next school year for 23 or 24, 25. So what we have in front of you on the screen is the general fund. You'll notice the first 2 lines there are 0. Those are voter-approved referendums or voter-approved referendums that were recently converted to board approved. There was some new legislation that allows for that. We as a district do not have any voter-approved referendums. Therefore, we didn't have anything to convert to a board-converted referendum. So you see those lines being 0 for both years and would continue to be 0 absent going to the public for a referendum. We're not going to go through line by line. The majority of these are just general levies. So lines 3 through 5 are pupil driven. That's the majority of our general fund revenue. You will see that going up. The reason that's going up is because it's driven by enrollment. And so we had some negative enrollment adjustments in last year's levy. So because there's an advance in terms of when we project enrollment in levy compared to when the revenue actually comes in, the years that they're making those enrollment adjustments for were 21 and 22, those COVID impact years where we saw some enrollment declines. So clearly, we ended up with enrollment less than what we had levied for and projected. Those negative adjustments have now dropped off, and so we see that revenue going up current proposed levy. The other one that I'll just point out because it looks a little bit strange is the reemployment levy. The reemployment levy is unemployment, and so that was a negative last year, which is unusual. We wouldn't usually see negative levies. The reason for that, again, because we levy 2 years in advance, we had levied for those years anticipating unemployment during COVID. We paid significant expenses, and then a year later, the state came in and gave us federal dollars to essentially reimburse that. And so because we already got reimbursed by the federal government, we functionally need to pay back the levy that we collected from taxpayers because we can't collect money 2 times for the same thing. As much as we would like to, we can't legally do that. So that is a little bit strange in the fact that that had a negative last year, but that's the reason for that. Otherwise, all of our levies are really very consistent from the previous year, and the general fund increase really being attributed to those lines 3, 4, and 5 that are pupil-driven. The next component of the levy is community education. The vast majority of the community education levy isn't enrollment-driven, but it's population-driven, so it goes off of census counts. You see a significant decrease in the community education levy. I want to be clear that that doesn't mean that we're cutting community education programming. We are not going to generate less revenue or make reductions. There was a piece of legislation as part of the last session that shifted some of the community ed funding formula from levy over to aid. And so a portion of our community education funding will now come through a pretty significant portion, actually, in the form of state aid instead of levy. So that's helping to offset some of those general fund adjustments that are increasing, which helps to minimize our tax increase. And then the last component of the levy is debt service. So there's 2 portions of debt service. There's the regular debt service, which would pay on any sort of voter-approved debt. And then there's the long-term facilities debt service. That's those, anything that qualifies under the long-term facilities maintenance program. You see a significant increase there. That was obviously projected, and that was what the board approved in the issuance of the $15 million in alt facility bonds for the improvements that are upcoming at Apollo. Part of that is being offset by a decrease elsewhere in the debt service levy. That's coming majority from what they call excess fund balance adjustments. So when you levy for your required principal and interest payments, they have you collect 5% more than what you're actually going to pay to account for delinquents, because what we don't want is that we don't collect enough revenue from taxpayers to make our annual debt service payments. So if that delinquent portion percentage becomes less than that, we end up essentially over collecting and they do negative adjustments. In addition, as we've seen interest rates go up, we've seen significant interest coming into the debt service fund that we wouldn't have had previous years. And so that plays into those adjustments too. So that's why you see that significant decrease on that required debt service line. So then when we look at all 3 components combined, in total, it's about a 3.6% increase, which when we brought the request for the bonds to the board is essentially what we had projected. We had, depending on where rates had come, anticipated that to be, kind of right around that 3.5%. And it's up just a little bit higher than that because of some of those enrollment adjustments dropping off. We also always like to point out the difference between our levy and how a city or a county would levy. We don't set up a percent tax rate. So as we see the market value increase and tax capacity increase, we actually see our tax rate go down. And so you can see over the 5 years presented on that kind of second to last line, in 2020-21, we had essentially a tax rate of about 26%, and that's down now to about 22.5%. Using some assumptions on what will happen in tax capacity, that's what it would be with a 3% increase, which is pretty conservative. Our 5-year average increase in tax capacity has been about 7%. We know what's happened with the market. Anybody who has seen their own personal tax statement knows that property valuations have gone up significantly. And so going into the last year, we actually had about a 15% increase in net tax capacity, which really, you can see that showing up in the difference between the tax rate in 22-23 to 23-24. That's really where it took the biggest dip because of that increase in capacity. So that is what I have, unless there are questions.
Al and then Scott?
Yeah, Amy, I have a question on the general fund. There's a significant decrease in LTFM and a significant increase in building lease levy. They kind of offset somewhat, but what's causing that?
So the increase in LTFM really generally just has to do with aid and levy shift. So there's an aid portion of LTFM and it factors.
Decrease, isn't it?
Or sorry, the decrease in long-term facilities is generally just shifting how much comes in the form of aid versus levy. The increase, so it's not related to the lease levy. The increase in lease levy is truly an increase. We had an increase in our lease with St. Cloud State for the CO2 program of about that amount, plus some increases in some of our activities or ice time, things like that, that are included in the lease levy. So the lease levy increase is truly reflective of increased lease costs.
With long-term facilities, we're not looking at a significant decrease in the dollars that are
We're
being
not.
spent?
So our project amount and the amount that we're having as our total budget stays the same, but there's an aid component of that, and so sometimes some of that comes in aid versus levy. It factors in building age, so as your buildings get older, you get a little bit more coming in the revenue form because the state aid factors in building. So we would typically see each year, as long as the total budget for projects stays the same, which it did in the 2 years presented, you would generally see that kind of decrease in levy each year and aid increase slightly each year as your building age goes up, unless you build a new building. So that's
My
really-
concern, of
Yep.
course, is just if you decrease LTFM, it comes back to bite you later.
Right, yeah, we are not spending less. So the LTFM plan the board approved in July holds that total kind of pay-as-you-go project cost at $8 million, which was the same as 22-23.
When we talk about levy, we're actually talking about a whole bunch of sub-levies, aren't we?
Yes, so this actually comes from a report that's about 37 pages long that show how each of these lines is calculated, and they're all driven by underlying statutes that set the authority for each individual line item.
Okay, and some of those sub-levies, we get state aid on, some we do not, and
Right, so all of these, they're all a little bit different. There's some components like long-term facilities maintenance, achievement and integration that are part aid, part levy. Career and technical is, again, that can be the same. There can be an aid component to that. Others, like unemployment, are 100% levy. There's no state aid tied to that. But it's really, again, based on how the statute is written for the funding for each individual program as to how that split is determined and how much we can collect.
in the overall big picture, how much of our income is state aid, how much of it is federal aid, and how much of it is levy?
So I don't have the percents off the top of my head. The vast majority of our funding comes from state and federal. We've seen that federal shift over the last few years with the significant COVID relief ESSER funds. I want to say the levy is about 10%. It's really especially when we talk about general fund, right? The debt service is all of our revenue. If we look at the revenue budget for the debt service fund, that is the only revenue that we collect to pay on existing debt. The only other revenue that comes into there, again, is interest, if there's interest being accrued, but then that kind of gets itself trued up to the levy with those excess adjustments. Community education, I would say, It depends on the program. So there are some programs that, like the general community education, that are primarily levy. There are other community ed programs like school readiness that have no levy component. So it's really not even consistent from fund to fund. But in our general fund, it's a really relatively small portion of our total operating budget. The significant funding is coming from state aid.
So our levy is around 10% of our total income, more or less.
Yeah, I can't remember the percents off the top of my head. It's in the budget book, but it's not a significant portion, no.
Okay. In the debt service, there was a point where we refinanced some bonds, and we did it before the old bonds were even callable. How does that affect?
So you're not going to see the effect of that on this levy. Those bonds are callable in 2027. So we will see a decline in the debt service levy come through in that pay 27 year when the bonds are callable and we flip to the new schedule. Right now, we're still levying for the first issuance until that call date. But yes, that will create a future reduction in the debt service levy.
Okay. We're getting interest on this money too, I would assume.
We are, but then again, that plays into those debt service levy adjustments, because as we get interest, it increases the fund balance, and then it looks at that and says, you shouldn't have more than a certain percent in your fund balance. And so then it, again, just uses that to offset some of the other increases. And that's not uncommon. We see those debt service fund balance adjustments in a number of years, just because we tend to see lower delinquents. Some areas that are primarily residential and tax base see higher delinquents because you tend to see less delinquents with large commercial taxpayers than you do residentials. And so that 5% is really set on a statewide kind of average assumption. We historically haven't seen a 5% delinquent rate. So we kind of have those excess adjustments on a continuing basis.
Thank you. Good job.
Anyone else? Good. Okay, so administration is recommending that we approve the maximum levy limitation certified by the Minnesota Department of Education. Looking for a motion.
So
So move.
Second.
Okay, we'll go Monica, motion, and then Al second. Zach, can you please call vote?
Zach Dorholz, yes. Shannon Haas?
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz?
Yes.
Heather Weems? Scott Andresen?
yes.
Natalie Copeland?
Yes.
Al Dahlgren?
Yes.
Okay, and then we're moving on to a discussion item, which is the announcement of final levy certification date, again presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Yes, and so this is just our legal requirement to that final levy, which I alluded to earlier, is in December. The final levy certification is done at the regular school board meeting, which will be on December 20th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. here at the district office. And there is time at that meeting for public input as part of our truth and taxation requirements.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Thank you. Not going anywhere, I guess. All right. Moving on to enrollment report. Another discussion item presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you. And this is a lot of numbers, so you do have a printed copy in front of you. We are looking at the far right column is the column that we want to look at. And so let me let me flip back. I cut off the right column, so we'll just look at it here in Excel. So what we're looking at is fall enrollment, and so this is our standard enrollment report that we do every year at this time on the second Friday of September, so after the first 2 weeks of school. So we'll look kind of at enrollment by grade level. So we'll look at elementary first, and then secondary, and then look at alternative programs and early childhood. In total, we are up in enrollment, excluding early childhood, which can fluctuate from year to year depending on what we're approved for VPK and who's coming and going for ECSE. But if we take early childhood out of the mix, kind of the overall high note summary is that we are up by about 194. However, 46 of that is McKinley. Just as we've seen more students in need of credit recovery, we're higher to start the fall than we were last year at this time. So if you take McKinley out, we have an overall increase of 148, which is about 1.6% compared to last fall. Elementary enrollment, which you can see on the screen, is accounting for 94 of that, or about 2.3%. So total elementary enrollment, 4,023 last year, 4,117 this fall. Really, the kind of key takeaways from there, if we look site by site, you'll see a couple things that really jump out. We have a significant decrease at Lincoln and a large increase at Talahi. That was to be expected as we had the third grade shift from Lincoln to Talahi. And then at Lincoln, Westwood, and Discovery, you'll see increases in total across those three sites that are coming from the immersion, from the addition of those immersion programs at those sites. The only school that we have a significant decrease at is Oak Hill. So Oak Hill has gone down by about 65. However, some of that we had anticipated because that Discovery immersion program is also servicing students from Oak Hill. And so we see that reflected in those counts. The other thing I'll point out is kindergarten numbers. So in total, our kindergarten numbers for our second Friday are at 747. This is down about 20 from last year, but last year, as you recall, was a particularly high year. We had some students who had, our belief was that they had delayed entrance during some of the pandemic, and so really very stable. Also, as we track that large kindergarten class last year to this year, that fall count last year for kindergarten was 767, and our current first grade is 761. So showing good retention of that large class moving forward. As we move into secondary, so it's a little bit unique this year. As we scroll down, you'll see we have the addition of Central Minnesota Virtual Academy for our online school. So you will see some decreases across a number of our secondary schools. But when we look at the secondary enrollment in total, with the online school included, we're up about 30 students from last year, with 24 of that being at the middle level and 6 of that at the high school level. So we're not going to go school by school because they're really pretty consistent from prior year, with the exception of that CMVA. And then you see the numbers there for CMVA equate to 126, what I'm going to kind of use the term student equivalents. At the middle school level, all of our CMVA students are full-time. And so there's 38 students. They're all enrolled 100%. It's an all or nothing program. At the high school, you can enroll in all 100% on through CMVA online, or you can do part in person and part online. And so there's the equivalent of 88 kind of full-time students, which really represents 159 bodies who are taking at least one course, anywhere from one course, one trimester, all the way up to full-time. 45 of those 159 are full-time CMVA for the high school. So then looking at alternative sites are up about 70 from last year. Again, vast majority of that is coming from McKinley, which is up 46 students from last fall. And then you see slight increases kind of across the majority of those other programs to account for the remainder of the difference. And then early childhood, very stable, just a slight decrease as we get kids enrolled and fill seats, but very comparable to last year. exciting that we do finally have that permanent approval on those VPK seats that were set to expire. So we should be able to see that VPK number be stable, or if anything, potentially go up. There will be additional VPK funding coming through next year that we would certainly apply for and hope to potentially get some seats added. So that is what I have. If there are questions, I know it's a lot of numbers.
Is this comparing September 15th to September 15th?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And so some of our sites have significant increases from September to September, but had picked up kids during the year. So it may not be that we're necessarily 150 students over what we projected. We're really very close when you look at K-12 enrollment overall to what we had projected when we staffed for last spring. Because some of those sites had picked up enrollment from September through last spring as the year went on. And so that's the numbers that we use to formulate our projections. And so where we're at is really very, very close to what you would have seen in the budget that was brought to the board and what we're staffed for.
Al?
Amy, you reported kindergarten, but I don't see it on here. Is that
I always just pull the numbers. We don't report the elementaries by grade because otherwise it gets just too messy to try to list each elementary and each grade. But I do always pull the kindergarten numbers from the raw data when we get it.
Do you have it in a way that you can send it to us?
I can put something together, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want just kindergarten or do you want by grade for all elementary?
Just kindergarten?
Okay.
By school, though.
Yep, I can get that.
The Minnesota Virtual Academy, this is the first year. Are we seeing signs that this is going to be a viable program over time, or what are we seeing so far?
Yeah, I would say that we're, certainly we would like to see those numbers go up. It's definitely varies by grade. Right now our middle level numbers are lower at 38 across the 3 grades. We'd like to be able to get those certainly up, but with a new program, we know that takes time. When we get to the high school level, our 9th grade numbers are really quite low. I suspect, again, that will go up as we have students who did the middle school. We would expect that they would continue, but we see significant numbers then moving through the grades. So we have a lot of 12th grade students who are participating. It's also being an option for some students if it's the only class that is keeping them potentially from graduating. It's one more option to fit things into the schedule. So certainly, I think we're projecting that it's going to be a permanent viable program.
That's good to hear. Tammy, how's our marketing going on that?
Hey, Scott, can I just tell you that next board meeting, we're getting a presentation on it? So I know you're just building enthusiasm for it.
I didn't know that.
Is there anything? Scott, did you have any other ones? All right, thanks, Amy. Okay, moving on then to reports. We have superintendent's reports.
Thank you so much, Chair Haas, Board of Education, Cabinet, members of the audience, and those at home. Tonight, I want to really focus on some of the upcoming events to make sure our public is well aware of what's coming up. So this Thursday, our Katherine Johnson Education Center has our open house from 4:30 to 6:30, and we would love anybody to stop by. It is a drop-in to tour the facilities, meet some of the staff, and see the amazing spaces that we have for our students. Our first superintendent and community coffee and conversation is this Friday at 9 a.m. here in this very room. room. Again, it is a drop-in, so people are welcome to come right at 9, stay for the full hour, or they can just pop in and out. Our assistant superintendents and our executive directors will all be there to help facilitate conversation and answer questions and get feedback from our community. As I said on the radio, we are St. Cloud area's public schools, and that means we want to be in constant partnership and relationship with our community, and so we would love to see a full house here Friday at 9. Friday is a busy day. We do have the ribbon cutting at Michie Field at Apollo at 6:30, and so we'd love to see a huge crowd to show off that beautiful facility. And we also have a football game happening shortly thereafter, so also very excited about that. It is our homecoming on the north side, and it is also homecoming on the south side. And while there is not a ribbon cutting happening at Tech, that event and is equally exciting, and we would love to see members of our community supporting our south side as well. I know it's a hard choice. You could do back and forth like I intend to do. And then we do have, as a reminder to our listening families and community, we do have an early out scheduled on October 4th. We have not done those in a few years, and so it's just important to remind our families that that is upcoming. So our students will be heading home a bit early, and what is happening in the afternoon for those 2 hours is that we are going to make very good use of our time with our non-licensed and licensed staff. We have, I going to make this up, 65, 70 different sessions that staff are able to choose to attend, and they are all learning opportunities designed to align directly with our. It is part of the kickoff of that 3-year professional learning plan that you heard Donna talking about. And our staff will get to choose, just like we heard Donna talking about student learner agency, we know that is equally important for our adult learners. And so our staff will be choosing their pathway, learning, deciding what they want to learn about and how they want to learn it. So we are really excited about that opportunity. So we sure hope to see all of this team at some of our upcoming events, as well as our public in the future.
Thank you. And then we have Board of Education Standing Committee reports. I believe we have 2. Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee Chair Natalie Copeland.
Yes, 12 hours ago or so, we talked about 2 things. One was the Minnesota Student Survey review. We had asked Donna to present on that, and so we reviewed the data from the most recent Minnesota Student Survey, and one of the key takeaways is how the mental health of our students continues to be a major need in our school community, as we talk about a lot here as well. And then we had a discussion on what makes a well-rounded student. So we reviewed what we discussed so far about this topic, and then began to dive into the process for thinking through and answering this question across our community with many stakeholders. We surfaced that this will not be a short project, and with this first step, the first step is going to be to design the process for gathering stakeholder feedback. And understanding the feedback will help us move to the next step, which could possibly be developing 742's profile of a graduate, which we heard about earlier today, and that is another ongoing discussion. So I have a sense that that'll be an agenda item for a long time on this committee's, but we're all very passionate about it. So the next meeting is October 18th, again at 8:30.
And Al, do you have a report? Board Finance and Audit Committee Chair Al Dahlgren.
Board Finance and Audit Committee met on September 15th, last Friday. I was unable to be there myself, but Amy, Scott, Monica, and Carl were all there, along with the Superintendent Observer, Juanita Chamez. The discussion and agenda included, let me say it this way. The discussion included an agenda item on the preliminary levy, which Amy covered in detail tonight, so I'm not going to go any further than that.
Thank you. Then we have future agenda items. October board meeting work session topics will include approval of a summary evaluation of the superintendent, tentative agreements, if any, talent development programming, Central Minnesota Virtual Academy status update, and schools update. At this time, does any board member wish to suggest a future item, agenda item? Yes?
Board members are not currently being offered medical or dental coverage by the district. Perhaps it could be an offer made at the same as a full-time rate for regular employees, full-time employees. It's something that we could think about. We certainly wouldn't have to opt in, but it'd be nice to have that option available.
Okay, so I think what we should do is get some experts to tell us what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do and how we would go about doing that. Does
Yes,
that work?
sounds good.
Awesome.
Board
Okay.
Development Committee?
I think our expert first step will be Tracy. So we'll do some research and find that out.
Okay, move.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. So next, we have one more item on our agenda. It is a closed session item, evaluation of the superintendent. And the school board is going to move into closed session to address an annual evaluation of the superintendent pursuant to Minnesota statute 13D.05 subdivision 3A. And then once we close the closed session, we will come back, open the board meeting back up, and then immediately adjourn. And then next board meeting, we will report on our closed session. So the time is, I would love a motion, thank you.
I would move that we close the meeting and
Okay.
move into the closed session for the superintendent evaluation.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Al and a second by Monica. Do we want to vote on this? All in favor? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so meeting is now closed, still 8:11 PM.